The wagon wheel cracked against a buried stone, and Zara Whitmore felt her daughter slip from her frost-numbed fingers before she could catch her breath to scream. She lunged forward in the driving snow, her hands finding the small body of 3-year-old Emma just as the child began to wail, more startled than hurt. The wind howled across the empty plains of northern New Mexico territory like a living thing, hungry and merciless, and Zara pulled her daughter close against her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of the small heart beneath layers of wool that were already soaked through. It was December of 1881, and Zara had been told the route from Santa Fe to the mining camps near the Colorado border would be passable even in winter. The man who sold her the wagon and the aging mare had smiled with too many teeth and promised her clear skies. She had believed him because she needed to believe him, because going back to Santa Fe meant going back to her husband's brother and his wandering hands, and his threats spoken low when others could not hear. Thomas had been dead for 6 months, kicked by a horse outside a saloon, and his brother Richard had wasted no time claiming Thomas's modest savings and the small house on the edge of town. Zara had taken what she could carry, purchased what she could afford, and left before dawn 3 days ago. Now she was going to die in this storm with her daughter, frozen somewhere between nowhere and nothing, because she had been desperate and foolish and had trusted a stranger's smile. The mare stumbled again, and this time Zara felt the whole wagon lurch sideways. She hauled on the reins with hands she could barely feel, calling out to the horse in a voice that the wind tore away before it left her lips. Emma was crying in earnest now, her small face red and wet with tears that froze on her cheeks almost as soon as they fell. Zara wrapped her own coat around the child, holding her daughter with one arm while trying to control the wagon with the other. The cold bit through her dress like knives, and she knew with a terrible certainty that they would not survive the night. She did not see the rider until he was almost upon them, a dark shape emerging from the white curtain of snow like a ghost made solid. The horse he rode was enormous, a bay gelding that seemed unbothered by the storm, and the man in the saddle sat straight-backed and calm as if he were on a Sunday ride through pleasant weather. He pulled up alongside the wagon, and Zara saw dark eyes beneath the brim of a hat crusted with ice, a face weathered and strong, a mouth set in a grim line. "You cannot stay here," he called out, his voice cutting through the wind. It was not a question or a suggestion. It was simply fact. "The wheel is damaged," Zara shouted back, hating the way her voice shook with cold and fear. "The mare is failing." The rider dismounted in a single fluid motion, his boots crunching in the deep snow. He came to the side of the wagon and looked up at her, and Zara saw that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 years old, with a strong jaw darkened with several days of beard growth. His coat was heavy leather lined with sheepskin, and he wore gloves that looked warm and sturdy. His gaze moved from her face to Emma's, taking in the child's blue-tinged lips and the way Zara held her. "How far to shelter?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer would not be good. "My ranch is 2 miles west," he said, "but you will not make it in this wagon. The mare is done, and that wheel will not hold another 100 yards. Zara felt something crack inside her chest, some last vestige of hope or pride. She looked down at her daughter, at Emma's small face tucked against her shoulder, and felt tears burn hot in her eyes. "Then we will die here," she said quietly. The cowboy reached up without asking permission and lifted Emma from Zara's arms. The child cried out in protest, reaching for her mother, but he held her firmly and gently at the same time, tucking her inside his coat where she would be warm. Then he looked at Zara with eyes that were hard and determined and allowed no argument. "Get down," he said. "You are both coming with me. Now you are both mine, and mine do not die in snowstorms." There was something in his voice, some absolute certainty that cut through Zara's fear and exhaustion. She climbed down from the wagon on legs that barely held her weight, and the cowboy caught her elbow with his free hand to steady her. He was tall, she realized, half a head taller than her late husband had been, and solid as mountain stone. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can try," Zara said through chattering teeth. He nodded once and turned to his horse, settling Emma more securely inside his coat so that only her small face peeked out. Then he swung up into the saddle with Emma cradled against him and reached down with one strong hand. Zara grasped it and felt herself lifted up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. She had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist and press close against his back, feeling the warmth of him even through the layers of leather and wool. "Hold tight," he said, and kicked the horse into motion. The ride was a blur of white and cold and the steady, powerful movement of the horse beneath them. Zara buried her face against the cowboy's back and held on with all the strength she had left, feeling Emma's small body tucked safely between them. Time seemed to stretch and compress at once, until she no longer knew if they had been riding for minutes or hours. She thought she might be dying after all, that this was some strange dream her freezing mind had conjured, but then she felt the horse slow and heard the cowboy's voice calling out, "Open up, I have people." There was a confusion of sound and movement, and then strong hands were lifting her down from the horse. Zara's legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground, and she would have fallen if someone had not caught her. She heard the cowboy's voice again, sharp with command, and then she was being carried through a doorway into warmth so sudden and overwhelming that it hurt. She was placed in a chair near a fireplace where flames roared and crackled, and a thick blanket was wrapped around her shoulders. Someone pressed a tin cup of something hot into her hands, and she drank without tasting, feeling the liquid burn all the way down. Her vision cleared slowly, and she saw that she was in a large room with rough wooden walls and sturdy furniture. A kitchen area occupied one corner, and several doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. Two men stood near the fire watching her with concerned expressions, both dressed in work clothes and heavy boots. "Emma," Zara said, her voice coming out as a croak. "Where is my daughter?" "Here," the cowboy said, and she turned to see him kneeling beside her chair with Emma in his arms. The child was wrapped in a blanket, her small face pink now instead of blue, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "She is well. Cold, but well." Zara reached out with trembling hands and the cowboy placed Emma in her lap. Zara held her daughter close, pressing her face against the child's hair, feeling the tears come hot and fast. She wept silently while Emma dozed against her chest, and the men in the room looked away politely to give her what privacy they could. When she had control of herself again, Zara looked up to find the cowboy watching her with an expression she could not read. His hat was off now, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and she saw that his eyes were a deep brown flecked with gold in the firelight. "Thank you," she said, inadequate words for a debt she could never repay. "You saved our lives." He inclined his head slightly. "I am Jacob Garrick. This is my ranch, such as it is. These men are Pete and Sam, my hired hands." The two men nodded to her, and Pete, who was older with gray streaking his beard, stepped forward with another cup. "Coffee, madam, hot and strong." Zara took it gratefully, managing to hold the cup steady this time. The warmth was beginning to penetrate her frozen limbs, bringing with it a painful prickling sensation as feeling returned. "I am Zara Whitmore. This is my daughter, Emma. We were traveling to the mining camps when the storm caught us." Jacob frowned. The mining camps are another 30 miles north, and the passes will be closed until spring now. What business did you have there? Zara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to these strangers. But they had saved her life, and she owed them honesty at the least. My husband died 6 months ago. His brother claimed everything and made it clear we were not welcome. I heard there was work for a woman who could cook and sew in the mining camps, that I could make enough to get us through until spring, perhaps save enough to go further west. The three men exchanged glances, and Zara saw pity in their expressions that made her spine straighten despite her exhaustion. I am not asking for charity, she said quietly but firmly. I can work for my keep until the storm passes and we can continue on. Jacob studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. The storm will last for days, and even when it clears, the snow will be too deep for travel until the thaw. That will not come until March at the earliest. You would be stranded here for 3 months. Zara felt her heart sink. 3 months was an eternity, 3 months of being dependent on the charity of strangers, 3 months of being a burden. Then I will work, she said. I can cook and clean. I can mend clothes and help with whatever needs doing. I will earn our keep. Pete made a noise that might have been approval, and Sam nodded. Jacob continued to study her with that intense gaze that made her feel as if he could see straight through to her bones. Finally, he nodded once. We will discuss it in the morning. For now, you need food and rest. Sam, help me prepare the spare room. The spare room turned out to be small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in quilts and a small stove in the corner that Sam got burning hot while Jacob brought in more blankets. Zara sat on the edge of the bed with Emma in her lap, the child now fully asleep, and watched the two men work with quiet efficiency. When the room was warm, Jacob turned to her. There are nightshirts in the chest there and plenty of blankets. Pete is making stew. I will bring you both bowls when it is ready. I can come to the table, Zara began, but Jacob shook his head. You can barely stand. Rest. Morning is soon enough for work discussions. He left before she could argue further, closing the door softly behind him. Zara sat in the warm silence, holding her sleeping daughter, and felt the full weight of what had happened settle over her. They had come within minutes of dying in that storm, and this man, this stranger, had saved them without hesitation. Now you are both mine, he had said, and at the time Zara had been too frightened and cold to think about those words. But she thought about them now, and wondered what exactly he had meant. She changed Emma into a nightshirt that was far too large, tucking the sleeves and hem so the child would not tangle in the fabric. Then she changed into one herself, grateful for the soft, worn cotton that smelled of soap and sunshine, and climbed into the bed with her daughter. Emma murmured in her sleep and curled against Zara's side, one small hand fisting in the nightshirt. When Jacob brought the stew, Zara was sitting up against the headboard, and he handed her 2 bowls with thick slices of bread balanced on the rims. Eat what you can, he said. Sleep will come easier with food in your belly. Will you not join us? Zara asked, surprising herself with the invitation. Jacob paused in the doorway, then shook his head. Tonight you need rest more than conversation. He closed the door again, and Zara ate the stew slowly, savoring every bite. It was simple fare, beef and potatoes and carrots in a rich broth, but it tasted better than anything she could remember eating. She managed to wake Emma enough to get half a bowl into the child, and then they both slept, warm and safe for the first time in days. When Zara woke, pale winter light was filtering through the small window, and Emma was still asleep beside her. Zara lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house around her. She could hear men's voices, low and indistinct, and the clatter of dishes. The storm had passed, she realized. The wind no longer howled, and through the window she could see blue sky. She rose and dressed in her own clothes, which someone had brought in and laid over a chair during the night. They had been brushed clean of snow and dried by the fire. Her shoes were still damp, but wearable. She left Emma sleeping and ventured out into the main room. The three men were at the table eating breakfast, and they looked up as she entered. Jacob stood immediately, gesturing to an empty chair. "Sit. There is coffee and food." Zara sat, and Pete poured her coffee while Sam pushed a plate toward her laden with eggs and bacon and fried potatoes. She ate while the men talked quietly about work that needed doing, animals that needed tending now that the storm had passed. They included her in the conversation naturally, explaining the layout of the ranch and the livestock they kept. It was a working cattle ranch, Zara learned, with about 200 head scattered across the winter pastures. Jacob had built it 5 years ago with money he had saved from years of cowboying for other men's outfits, and Pete and Sam had been with him from the start. When breakfast was finished and the dishes cleared, Jacob turned to Zara with a serious expression. "We should speak plainly about your situation." Zara nodded, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I understand. I am grateful for your help last night, but I do not expect you to support me and my daughter for months. If you can tell me where the nearest town is, we will find a way." "The nearest town is Los Alamos, 10 miles south," Jacob said. "But it is barely a town, just a trading post and a few houses. There would be no work for you there and nowhere safe to stay." Zara felt her throat tighten. "Then what do you suggest?" Jacob leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes steady on her face. "I suggest you stay here. As you said, you can cook and clean and mend. Those are things that need doing, and Pete and Sam will tell you we are poor hands at domestic matters. You can help with the chickens and the kitchen garden come spring. In return, you and your daughter will have room and board and safety until the pass is clear, and you can continue on your way." It was more than fair. It was generous beyond measure, and yet Zara felt a prickle of unease. "Why would you do this?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." "You are a woman alone with a child trying to make your way in hard country," Jacob said. "That is all I need to know. I do not expect anything from you except honest work, Mrs. Whitmore. You will have your own room and your daughter will be safe. The men here are good men, and they know how to behave around women and children. You have my word on that." Zara looked at Pete and Sam and saw only open, honest faces. She looked back at Jacob, at his steady gaze and the quiet strength in his posture, and made her decision. "Then I accept with gratitude. I will work hard, Mr. Garrick. You will not regret this kindness." "Jacob," he said, "we do not stand on formality out here." "Then I am Zara," she replied, and saw something warm flash in his eyes before he nodded and rose from the table. The days fell into a pattern after that. Zara woke early and made breakfast for the men, learning their preferences and how they liked their coffee. She cleaned the house, which was not overly large but had been let go by men who were more concerned with cattle than dust. She washed clothes and mended torn shirts and patched worn trousers. Emma followed her everywhere, a small shadow who was slowly losing the pinched, frightened look she had worn since her father's death. Jacob was gone most days, out on the range with Pete and Sam checking the cattle and breaking ice on the water sources and hauling hay to the places where the animals gathered. But he came in every evening for supper, and Zara found herself looking forward to those quiet meals. Jacob was not a talkative man, but when he did speak, he was thoughtful and intelligent. He asked about her life before Thomas died, and she told him about growing up in Missouri, about coming west with Thomas, who had dreams of starting a freight business. She told him about Emma's birth, how she had almost died bringing the child into the world, how Thomas had held her hand and prayed over her through the long night. She did not tell him about the loneliness of her marriage, about Thomas's fondness for whiskey and cards, about the nights he did not come home. Those were private sorrows, and they felt disloyal to speak of now that Thomas was gone. But she thought Jacob saw more than she said, because his eyes would soften when she spoke of her daughter, and he always found small ways to make Emma smile. He carved the child a set of wooden animals, spending his evenings by the fire with his knife and a piece of wood while Zara sewed. Emma was enchanted by the horses and cows and chickens that appeared one by one, and she played with them for hours, making up elaborate stories that she narrated in her high, sweet voice. Jacob listened to those stories with the same serious attention he gave to everything, and Zara felt something warm and dangerous begin to grow in her chest when she watched him with her daughter. The weeks passed, and the snow deepened. Christmas came and went, marked by a special dinner of roasted chicken and dried apple pie that Zara made from the stores in the pantry. Jacob gave Emma a rag doll he had paid Pete to ride to Los Alamos to purchase from the trading post, and Zara was moved nearly to tears by the thoughtfulness of it. She had no gifts to give, but she made a special batch of cookies in shapes of stars and trees, and the men praised them lavishly while Emma giggled at their exaggerated expressions of delight. On New Year's Eve, they sat around the fire while the wind howled outside, and Pete played a harmonica he produced from somewhere. Sam sang in a surprisingly good baritone, and Jacob convinced Zara to dance, swinging her around the room in a simple waltz while Emma clapped her hands. Zara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember, and when the dance ended and she was breathless and flushed, she looked up to find Jacob smiling down at her with an expression that made her heart stutter in her chest. "Happy New Year, Zara," he said softly, and she felt the room fall away until there was only the two of them, only his dark eyes and strong hands still holding hers. "Happy New Year, Jacob," she whispered back, and knew with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure that she was falling in love with this quiet, steady man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return. January brought bitter cold and more snow. The cattle huddled in the sheltered valleys, and the men worked long hours keeping them alive. Zara worried every time Jacob rode out into the frozen landscape, and felt relief flood through her when he returned safe each evening. She began to notice small things about him: the way his hair curled when it was damp, the calluses on his hands from years of hard work, the way he always hung his hat on the same peg by the door. She noticed how gently he moved around Emma, how he never raised his voice, how his rare smiles transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. She thought she hid her growing feelings well, but one evening in late January, Pete caught her watching Jacob as he played with Emma on the floor, and the old cowboy winked at her with a knowing grin. Zara felt her face flame with heat, but Pete just chuckled and went back to his coffee, and she realized that perhaps she was not as subtle as she had hoped. If Jacob noticed her attention, he gave no sign. He was always polite and respectful, never overstepping the boundaries of propriety. But sometimes, Zara would look up and find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, and she wondered if perhaps he felt the same pull she did. February arrived with a brief thaw that turned the snow to slush and made travel possible for a few days. Jacob rode to Los Alamos for supplies, and returned with fabric for Zara to make new dresses for herself and Emma, and a box of peppermint candies that made the child squeal with delight. He also brought news that the passes to the north were still closed and would likely remain so until late March at the earliest. "I am sorry," he said to Zara that evening after Emma was asleep. They were sitting by the fire, as had become their habit, while Pete and Sam played cards at the table behind them. "I know you are eager to continue on your way." Zara looked at him in surprise. "I am not eager at all," she said honestly. "I am grateful for every day I can stay here, where Emma is safe and warm and happy." Jacob turned to look at her fully, and there was something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "Are you happy, Zara?" It was an intimate question, more intimate than anything he had asked before. Zara felt the weight of Pete and Sam's attention behind them, knew they were listening even as they pretended to focus on their card game. "Yes," she said softly. "I am happy here, happier than I have been in a very long time." Something shifted in Jacob's expression, some barrier falling away. "Then perhaps you should consider staying," he said. "Not just until spring, but longer." Zara's heart began to pound. "What are you saying, Jacob?" He reached out slowly and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "I am saying that I have grown accustomed to having you here. You and Emma. I am saying that I do not want you to leave when the pass is clear. I am saying that I want you both to stay permanently if you will have me." Behind them, Zara heard the scrape of chairs and the sound of Pete and Sam quietly leaving the room, giving them privacy. She stared at Jacob, at his dear, familiar face, and felt tears prick her eyes. "Jacob, I am a widow with a child. I have nothing to offer you except hard work and a ready-made family." "You have everything I want," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know this is fast, that we have known each other barely 2 months, but I have lived alone for 5 years, Zara, and I was content with that life. And then I found you in that snowstorm, and you looked at me with such fierce determination to live, such love for your daughter, and I thought, this is a woman worth knowing. These past weeks, watching you with Emma, seeing how you have made this house into a home, listening to your voice and your laughter, I have fallen in love with you. If you do not feel the same, I understand, and you are welcome to stay as long as you need with no expectations. But if there is any chance that you might come to care for me, I am asking you to give us a chance." Zara felt the tears spill over and track down her cheeks. "I do not need to come to care for you, Jacob. I already do. I think I have since that first day, when you said we were yours and you were not going to let us die. I did not think I would ever want another man after Thomas, but you are nothing like him. You are kind and patient and good, and Emma adores you, and I love you." The words hung in the air between them, and then Jacob was standing and pulling her up with him, and his hands were framing her face as he looked down at her with eyes that shone in the firelight. "Marry me, Zara. Let me take care of you and Emma. Let me be a father to her and a husband to you. Let us be a family." "Yes," Zara whispered, and then his mouth was on hers, warm and sure and gentle. She melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, feeling the solid strength of him and the tender way he held her as if she were something precious. The kiss deepened, and Zara felt years of loneliness and fear and grief burn away in the heat of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I will get a ring from Los Alamos. We can send for a preacher or ride to Santa Fe when the road's clear." "I do not need a ring," Zara said, laughing through her tears. "I just need you." "You will have both," Jacob promised and kissed her again, softer this time but no less heartfelt. They told Emma the next morning over breakfast, and the child looked between them with wide eyes. "Does that mean Jacob is going to be my papa?" she asked. "If you want me to be," Jacob said seriously, crouching down so he was at eye level with the little girl. "I know I cannot replace your father, Emma, but I promise I will love you and your mama and take care of you both for as long as I live." Emma considered this gravely, then threw her small arms around Jacob's neck. "I want you to be my papa," she said firmly, and Zara watched Jacob's eyes close as he hugged the child close, and she fell in love with him all over again. Pete and Sam were delighted with the news, congratulating them with enthusiasm and promising to help prepare for a wedding. Pete volunteered to ride to Los Alamos to send word to Santa Fe for a preacher, and Sam began planning improvements to the house to add more rooms for a growing family. The waiting was both difficult and sweet. Jacob courted Zara properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof, bringing her wildflowers he found growing in sheltered spots, sitting with her in the evenings and talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16 and working his way north as a cowboy. He told her about his dream of building a ranch that would last, that he could pass down to children someday. Zara told him about her own dreams, smaller and more modest perhaps, but no less important. She wanted a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers. She wanted to raise chickens and maybe a pig or two. She wanted to teach Emma to read and write, to give her daughter opportunities she herself had never had. Jacob listened to all of this and promised to help her achieve every dream, and Zara believed him. They did not share a bed, though Zara often lay awake at night thinking about the kisses they had shared and anticipating their wedding night with a mixture of nervousness and desire. Thomas had been her only lover, and those encounters had been brief and unsatisfying, more about his needs than hers. She wondered if it would be different with Jacob, if his gentleness and patience would extend to the marriage bed, and the thought made her flush with heat. The preacher arrived in mid-March, riding in with the first real thaw. He was an older man, weathered and kind, who had been making the circuit of isolated ranches and small settlements. He agreed to stay a few days to perform the ceremony and rest his horse, and Pete and Sam threw themselves into preparations with an enthusiasm that was both touching and slightly overwhelming. They scrubbed the house from top to bottom, hung bunting that Pete had brought back from one of his supply runs, and even convinced Jacob to slaughter one of the steers for a proper wedding feast. Zara sewed herself a new dress from the fabric Jacob had brought her, simple but pretty in a soft blue that brought out her eyes. She made a matching dress for Emma, who was beside herself with excitement at being allowed to participate in the ceremony. The wedding was held on a clear, cold morning in mid-March. The sun shone bright on the melting snow, and the sky was a deep, endless blue. They stood in front of the fireplace with Emma between them, and the preacher spoke the words that would bind them together. Jacob's voice was steady as he made his vows, his dark eyes never leaving Zara's face. Zara's voice shook slightly with emotion, but she spoke clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor him all the days of her life. When the preacher declared them man and wife, Jacob cupped Zara's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Emma cheered, and Pete and Sam whooped with joy, and the preacher beamed at them all with benevolent approval. The celebration lasted all day, with food and music and dancing. Neighbors from the surrounding ranches had been invited, families that Zara had not yet met, and they welcomed her warmly into their community. She felt overwhelmed by the kindness of these people, by the way they treated her as one of their own from the moment Jacob introduced her as his wife. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Emma was put to bed by a cheerfully tipsy Pete, who promised to stay in the room with her so that Jacob and Zara could have privacy. Zara felt her nerves return as she followed Jacob to what was now their shared bedroom, the room he had occupied alone for 5 years. He closed the door behind them and turned to face her, and Zara saw that he was nervous too, which somehow made her feel better. "I have never done this," he said quietly. "Been married, I mean. I want to make you happy, Zara, but I am not sure I know how." Zara crossed the space between them and took his hands in hers. "I have been married," she said honestly, "but it was not what I hoped it would be. What I want with you is different, Jacob. I want a true partnership in every way. I want to build a life with you, and I want tonight to be the start of that life together." Jacob pulled her close, and she felt the tension in his body, the way he held himself in check. "I do not want to hurt you," he murmured against her hair. "I do not want to rush you or make you feel that you owe me anything." "You could never hurt me," Zara said with certainty. "And this is not about owing. This is about wanting. I want you, Jacob. I have wanted you for weeks." She felt him shudder at her words, and then his mouth found hers in a kiss that was deeper and more urgent than any they had shared before. Zara responded with all the pent-up longing she had been holding back, her hands sliding up his chest to link behind his neck. Jacob's hands spanned her waist, pulling her close until they were pressed together, and Zara felt the evidence of his desire and knew that he wanted her just as much as she wanted him. They undressed each other slowly, with fumbling fingers and shy smiles, and when they finally came together in the narrow bed, Zara felt something shift deep inside her. This was nothing like her experiences with Thomas, nothing like the quick, awkward coupling she had endured. Jacob touched her as if she were precious, as if her pleasure mattered as much as his own, and Zara found herself responding in ways she had not known were possible. Afterwards, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Zara's head on Jacob's chest and his arms around her. She felt tears slip from her eyes and splash onto his skin, and he stirred, his hand coming up to stroke her hair. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, concern threading through his voice. "No," Zara said, laughing wetly. "No, you made me feel cherished. I never knew it could be like that, Jacob. I never knew I could feel like that." His arms tightened around her. "Every night from now on," he promised, "I will make you feel cherished every day for the rest of our lives." Zara believed him, and as she drifted off to sleep warm and safe in her husband's arms, she thought about the strange turns her life had taken. 6 months ago she had been trapped and desperate, mourning a husband she had never truly loved and fearing for her daughter's future. Now she was married to a man who made her heart sing, living in a home she was proud of, part of a community that welcomed her. It seemed impossible that so much could change in such a short time, but she was grateful for every moment that had led her to this place. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing green grass and wildflowers and the bawling of new calves. Zara threw herself into making the ranch truly a home, planting her garden and tending her chickens and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Emma thrived, growing brown and strong in the sunshine, following Jacob around like a small shadow and learning to ride on a gentle old mare that Jacob declared was perfect for a young lady learning her way with horses. The men treated Zara with respect and affection, clearly happy to have her as part of the ranch family. Pete taught her to shoot, insisting that every woman on an isolated ranch needed to know how to protect herself and her family. Sam showed her which plants were edible and which were poisonous, knowledge that had been passed down to him from his grandmother who had been part Cherokee. Zara's days were full and exhausting and deeply satisfying. She woke each morning beside her husband, made breakfast for her family, tended her home and garden, and fell into bed each night happy and fulfilled. Jacob was everything she had never known to hope for in a husband, patient and kind, and deeply passionate in the privacy of their bedroom. He made her laugh with his dry humor and think with his thoughtful observations, and he loved Emma with the same fierce devotion he showed to Zara. By June, Zara realized she had missed her monthly courses twice running, and knew with a mix of joy and nervousness that she was pregnant. She told Jacob that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. He stared at her for a long moment, then whooped with delight and swung her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and protested that he would make her dizzy. "A baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "Our baby, Zara. Are you happy? Are you frightened?" "Both," she admitted. "I nearly died having Emma and I am not getting any younger, but yes, Jacob, I am happy. I am so happy I could burst with it." He kissed her then, sweet and tender, and placed his hand over her still flat stomach as if he could feel the life growing there. "I will take care of you," he promised. "We will send for a doctor when your time comes. I will not lose you, Zara. I will not lose either of you." Zara believed him, because Jacob had never broken a promise to her yet. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Zara felt better than she had with Emma, less sick and more energetic, and she took it as a good sign. Jacob hovered over her like a mother hen, much to Pete and Sam's amusement, and Emma was beside herself with excitement at the prospect of being a big sister. They sent to Santa Fe for a doctor in January, when Zara's time drew near, and he arrived with a bag full of instruments and a calm, competent manner that put Zara's fears to rest. When her labor began on a cold night in early February, Jacob stayed by her side despite the doctor's suggestion that he wait elsewhere. He held her hand and wiped her face and murmured encouragement, and when their son was finally born after hours of hard work, he wept openly as he held the tiny, squalling infant. "A boy," he said in wonder. "We have a son, Zara." They named him Joshua, and Emma declared him to be the most beautiful baby ever born, even though he was red and wrinkled and looked rather like a small, angry old man. Zara recovered quickly this time, her body stronger and her spirit bolstered by Jacob's constant care. Within a week, she was up and moving around the house, and within 2 she was back to most of her regular activities. Life with a newborn was exhausting but joyful. Joshua was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches that allowed Zara to get enough rest to function. Emma was a devoted big sister, always wanting to hold her brother or help change his diapers. Jacob was completely besotted with his son, spending hours just staring at the baby with an expression of wonder on his face. As the years passed, the ranch prospered and grew. Jacob expanded his herd and built additional outbuildings. Pete and Sam became family in truth, eating at their table and celebrating holidays with them, beloved uncles to Emma and Joshua. 2 years after Joshua was born, Zara delivered a daughter they named Sarah, and 3 years after that, twin boys they called Michael and Matthew. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Jacob and Sam building additional bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Zara's garden grew as well, providing vegetables and herbs and flowers that she preserved and dried for the winter months. Emma grew into a capable young woman who could ride and rope as well as any cowboy, and who had her mother's quick mind and her stepfather's steady temperament. She never called Jacob anything but Papa, and Jacob never treated her any differently than his biological children. Joshua and Sarah and the twins grew up strong and healthy, running wild across the ranch lands and learning the skills they would need to make their own way in the world. Zara watched them with a full heart, grateful every day for the life she had built with Jacob, for the family they had created together. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were in bed and she sat on the porch with Jacob, Zara thought back to that terrible day in the snowstorm when she had been certain she and Emma would die. She thought about the desperation she had felt, the fear and the hopelessness, and then she looked at the man beside her and felt nothing but gratitude that fate had brought them together. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob would ask, taking her hand in his as he always did. "About how you saved my life," Zara would say. "About how you told me we were yours and you were not going to let us die." Jacob would smile, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart flutter even after years of marriage. "I kept my word, did I not? You and Emma were mine from that moment, and I have never let go." "And you never will," Zara would say, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We are bound together, Jacob, for all our days." "For all our days," he would agree. And they would sit together watching the stars come out over the New Mexico landscape, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious in each other, a love that had weathered storms both literal and figurative and emerged stronger for it. Emma married a neighboring rancher's son when she was 19, a good man who treated her with respect and affection. Jacob walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Zara wept openly as she watched her daughter speak her vows. Within a year, Emma had a child of her own, a boy she named Thomas after her father and Jacob after her papa, and Zara held her grandson with a sense of continuity and completion. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons of planting and harvest, of births and occasional deaths, of hardship and triumph. Pete passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a view of the mountains he had loved. Sam followed 5 years later, and they laid him to rest beside his old friend. But the ranch continued, passed down to Joshua, when Jacob decided he was ready to step back from the day-to-day operations. Emma's husband brought his family to help, and Sarah married a doctor from Santa Fe who was happy to set up practice in Los Alamos, which had grown into a proper town over the years. The twins went into business together, running a horse breeding operation that became known throughout the territory. Through it all, Zara and Jacob remained at the center, the foundation upon which their family was built. They grew old together, gray-haired and weathered but still strong, still devoted to each other and to the life they had created. They sat on the porch on summer evenings surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories of the old days when the ranch was new and the land was wild. And sometimes, when they were alone, Jacob would pull Zara close and whisper against her hair, "Do you remember the snowstorm? Do you remember the day I found you?" "Every day," Zara would whisper back. "I remember every day, and I thank God for it. You saved me, Jacob. You saved us both, and you gave us a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "We saved each other," Jacob would say, and kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night all those years ago. "And I would do it again, 1,000 times over. You are mine, Zara Garrick, and I am yours, and that is how it will always be." And Zara would hold him close and know that he was right, that they belonged to each other in a way that transcended the simple words of a marriage ceremony. They had been forged together in that snowstorm, two souls finding each other in the wilderness and choosing to build something beautiful and lasting. Years later, when Jacob passed away peacefully at the age of 82 with Zara holding his hand, she grieved deeply, but without regret. They had lived a good life together, a full life, and she had loved him every day of it. She lived on for another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that had grown from a desperate woman and a small child fleeing through a snowstorm. When her own time came, Zara died peacefully in her sleep in the house Jacob had built, in the bed they had shared for so many years. Her children buried her beside him on the hill overlooking the ranch, and on her headstone they carved words that told the story of her life. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she was lost in a storm and found by love. The ranch continued for generations, passing down through the family Jacob and Zara had built together. The story of how it all began became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. They spoke of the snowstorm and the desperate woman and the cowboy who had saved her, who had said those fateful words that changed everything. "Now you are both mine." And in the telling and retelling, the story became more than just history. It became a reminder of the power of compassion and courage, of the way a single act of kindness could ripple out through time and touch countless lives. It became proof that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that family could be built from strangers brought together by circumstance and choice. The land itself seemed to remember, the wind in the grass whispering the story, the mountains standing as silent witnesses to the love that had flourished in their shadow. And on winter nights when the snow fell soft and silent over the ranch, it was easy to imagine a wagon struggling through the storm, a woman holding her child close, and a cowboy riding through the white to save them both. It was a story with no true ending, because the legacy Jacob and Zara built together lived on in every child born to their family, in every kindness shown, in every moment when someone chose love over fear, courage over despair. The ranch stood as a testament to what they had created, not just a working cattle operation but a home in the truest sense, a place of safety and love and belonging. And if you visited that ranch even now, years and years after Jacob and Zara had passed, you would find their great-great-grandchildren still working the land, still telling the story of the snowstorm and the cowboy and the promise that had bound them all together. You would see the love that had started it all reflected in the way they treated each other, in the values they held dear, in the knowledge that family was everything and love was worth fighting for. Because that was the true heart of the story, the lesson that had been passed down through generations. Love was not always easy or simple. Love could be born from desperation and need just as easily as from passion and desire. But when it was real, when it was true, it could transform lives and create something that lasted beyond one lifetime or two, beyond measure or counting. Jacob had saved Zara from the snowstorm, but in truth, they had saved each other. She had given him a family and a purpose beyond the simple survival and success he had sought. He had given her safety and love, and the chance to become more than just a desperate widow fleeing a bad situation. Together, they had built something that mattered, something that endured. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple, if you stood on the hill where Jacob and Zara were buried, you could almost feel their presence. You could imagine them standing together looking out over the land they had loved, holding hands the way they always had, still together, even in death as they had been in life. The ranch house below would be lit with warm yellow light from the windows, and you would hear the sounds of family, of children laughing and adults talking, and the comfortable noises of a home well lived in. You would smell wood smoke and cooking food and the clean scent of the land after rain. And you would know, with a certainty that transcended logic or reason, that this was what mattered. This was what lasted, not the money or the land or the cattle, though those things had their place and their importance. But the love, the family, the connections forged between people who chose each other and committed to building a life together. That was what Jacob and Zara had created in the years after that snowstorm, and that was what lived on in every generation that followed. So the story did not really end, not in any meaningful way. It continued, evolving and growing, adapting to new times while holding fast to the core truths that had always been at its heart. And every winter when the first snow fell, someone in the family would tell the story again, would speak of the woman alone with her child and the cowboy who had saved them, and the promise that had changed everything. "Now you are both mine," he had said, and in saying those words, he had created something that would outlast them both, a love that would echo through time and touch countless lives. That was the power of commitment and courage, of choosing love even when it was unexpected or frightening or uncertain. That was the legacy Jacob and Zara had left behind, and it was a legacy worth celebrating, worth remembering, worth passing down to each new generation that came after. The wind whispered through the grass on the hill where they were buried, and if you listened carefully, you might hear it carrying their voices, still talking to each other after all these years, still planning and dreaming and loving. Because some bonds are too strong to be broken even by death, some loves too deep to be contained by the boundaries of a single lifetime, Jacob and Zara had found each other in a snowstorm. Two souls desperate and seeking and brave enough to take a chance on something new. They had built a life together that mattered, a family that thrived, a love that endured. And in the end, that was everything. That was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything that truly mattered in this world or any other.